Okay, it's been a while since I mentioned this Miranda and her story. Now, Miranda, she was part in Victorson County. She grew up in Victorson County, Texas, and she became a member of a group. Their children actually named them this group, the original group members. How original, huh? But they were a bunch of computer geeks back in the era when it wasn't cool to be a geek. A geek was a four-letter word, and a dirty one. And Miranda was more of a free spirit, and she, as time went by, she just went wherever she wanted to. Now they usually, as time went by, they usually kept track of all the members. Members could pay fee, like a fee or a membership fee, and they would have a lot of benefits for doing so, including they would get dividends and such from the group when they were young. Started off helping one another out to build businesses and companies and so forth, and like even helped some go to university to become lawyers and whatever they wanted to be. They helped them, and as time went by, they became very wealthy, and so they had a whole system in place where they could keep track of them, and they sent them dividend checks. They come back usually 2 weeks out of the year, and they do some training with the enforcement, and they were all new self-defense and how to defend others around them, and they did some work during those 2 weeks. They would get paid, but it was also paying back their dues in a way, and they had all kinds of perks for it, like if they ever needed a bodyguard, or they ever needed a lawyer, whatever it was. And not all of them moved out, some did, but Miranda was one that moved out, and she, and at this point in early 2020, she called Paige. Paige is a woman who runs a service that basically keeps track of everybody, and more to it than that, but Miranda called Paige, and they knew one another, didn't really care for one another, but they were original group members, and she called her service and let the service know that she needed help. She needed, and eventually they found out what it was, and it was, there was a lot of, they don't do things directly, but they have enforcement for that. But basically they knew found out Miranda and her adult daughter and that daughter's children needed to be rescued and brought back to Victorson County and be in a safe house. There was a lot of trouble with her daughter's husband. He was into a lot of things that weren't good, and they were afraid for their lives. Well, that whole situation caused problems with other people, other group members too, in the long run. So, okay, now a little bit more about Miranda. She originally grew up in Victorson County, but she's from a area, it's actually a town that has a rich history and why it earned its name. That's how they see it. And the name of the town, way back generations, think back whenever they had trains coming through, and kind of like the Wild Wild West kind of days, and in the county when it was developed. And the Outlaws is called the Outlaws now. The town is still called the Outlaws. And she grew up there, and this is really the rougher part of the county, Victorson County. And not everybody, of course, but they grow up rougher. The county is very wealthy, but that area, not quite as much. They were basically the ones who were kicked out of the other parts of the county. Maybe they were in prison because of what they did wrong. It depended on the defense, and then they could, offense, then they couldn't move back. And so Miranda grew up there, and she became one of the original group members, because she was interested in computers way back when. You can think back as far as for some of them in the 80s, back in the 80s, 1980s. Some of them knew one another from childhood and saw it progressed as they learned more about computers, way back then. And she was one of them, but she grew up there, and she grew up in a lifetime of abuse from her family. And she didn't want that to be the rest of her life, so she moved around a lot. Once she was able, an adult, she moved, and she just kept going. She did not want that kind of thing to be part of her life, that of her children. She wound up having a daughter, okay. And, but when she got married, the man she married, it was like she jumped from the frying pan into the fire. And eventually, the same thing happened to her daughter, and running away from her problems didn't resolve anything, and she really had needed to get help for the kind of dysfunctional family she grew up in, the abuse and everything. But she just kept running instead, and it became like a family tradition. Okay, and some of what she would do, she would vanish, like practically vanish without a trace. And like I said, she was part of these original group members, and she would get dividend checks, but they would basically, she was one that would just come back every once in a while and do a few of them were like that. They were kind of wandering types, wonders. And they'd make up for it by doing work and then off again. And she was one of them, just vanished without a trace. And like I said, Paige and her group, they kept track of them as best as they could, still. And everybody had signed contracts saying that they know that this is what it is, that they all know, okay? And some of them, like, to help support businesses, they would pay like $10 a month. Or for some, whatever they could help, whatever they could afford, that they would pay, that's their dues, And but some of them got a lot more back. But it was just the way the money was, goes through to help support other people. And now let's see. Okay, I was reading my notes, and I said, at age 13, her mother came out of the fog. Okay. I'm not sure. I wrote these, I don't know when. It could have been over a year ago. And just getting around to some of them. But it was when she was 17, she started going to these seasonal parties. And the county had parties for every season. Think, winter, spring, summer, fall. They had one in festival. Usually it was always in Festival, Texas. And they had, like shindigs, I think some people call it. Is that what it is? They just had festival parties, and they had things like farmers markets, and people sold all kinds of things. That's where, once every season they would have big sales, and they had barns that were open. Many of the farmers markets I've seen were like this, and they were basically barns that were made to where people could sell their goods. And it just didn't have to be. It didn't have to be just fruits and vegetables. It could be anything. And but they also would have, like dances and such, and have a real festival. So the whole atmosphere. And then she would go to that as soon as she was 17, and then, she started meeting some of the people in person that were these original computer group, and started meeting them in person. And one of them that she met was Jim, and he's the one that developed the enforcement. So I've been working on getting some of these videos made. These are fictional stories. Any story I make for whatever channel, I have more than one YouTube channel, that involve the enforcement, the Victorson County all around. Any of them that are part of the series, they're all fictional, and all standard fictional story disclaimers. They should all be in the description box below this video on YouTube. The ones that I mentioned, it's all completely coincidental. If it's not to resemble anybody, any situation, any place, thing, you know, at all. It's fictional, but of course things like Texas does exist. Dickerson County does not. It's fictional. The people in it, in the stories, the series, plural, are fictional. So anyway, but I've been trying to get these, you know, just the basic information, you know, kind of like cast of characters, and a little bit of the story about how they're involved with one another. And I've got a lot of characters. Yeah, I keep the information in binders, and you know, these are, some are rough drafts, some are actual stories written, some are verbal and copyrighted to me. Yeah. The author of the stories and the creator of the videos on this channel and the other channels of this story. So anyway, but I've been trying to do this, and it's a lot to get just the cast of characters and how they're related to one another. Eventually, I hope to get at some point soon, but I don't think it's going to be soon, more into the stories of it. Like this with Miranda. I think Miranda was one of the original ones that I made, and it's been years, okay? That her rescue is going to be very involved. Her and her daughter still don't even have a name for her daughter and her grandchildren. So, but I got a lot of characters, as I said. But anyway, just getting a little information out of, you know, on this. And the thing was that Miranda and Jim, they had a crush on one another, earlier on, and then that story develops too. Anyway, I'm wrapping this up. I'll talk to you in another video. Bye.